This is the Hope Strategy Podcast with Corey Blake and Josh Steinley. Okay, so welcome to another episode of the Hope Strategy Podcast. I'm your co-host, Corey Blake, and I'm here, as always, with Josh Steinley.
That was amazing.
Yeah, that was a great conversation for a lot of reasons, and I'm hopeful that anybody that listens to this conversation that we just had with Elder Jeffrey R. Holland is going to be able to take some real good insight from the conversation that we had with him. There's obviously a very personal tie to this. Josh and I are both members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to which Elder Jeffrey R. Holland is a leader. And so we've known him our entire lives. And so it was a fascinating conversation for us. But again, there's going to be something for anybody who listens. It was a great combo. By way of introduction, Elder Jeffrey R. Holland was ordained a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on June 23rd, 1994. At the time of his call, Elder Holland was serving as a member of the first Quorum of the 70, to which he'd been called on April 1st, 1989. A lot of that may not make sense to a lot of people, but those are all just different leadership roles that he had in this church. Elder Holland was a student leader and varsity athlete at Dixie High School and Dixie College in his native St. George, Utah. We talked a little bit about that in his upbringing. He received his bachelor's and master's degrees in English and religious education, respectively, from Brigham Young University. He also obtained a master and doctor of philosophy degrees, or a PhD, in American Studies at Yale University. Elder Holland was active in professional educational activity prior to his call to full-time church service. He referenced this towards the end of our conversation, but once you're in the calling in the church, or the responsibility that he has in the church, it is a life calling. It is something that he dedicated literally the rest of his life to as soon as he decided to accept that opportunity. Prior to that, though, he served as president of the American Association of Presidents of Independent Colleges and Universities, on the board of the National Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, and as a member of the National Collegiate Athletic Association's NCAA President's Commission. For his work in improving understanding between Christians and Jews, he was given the Torch of Liberty Award by the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith. He has served on the governing boards of a number of civic and business-related corporations and is the author of 15 books, 2 of which he co-authored with his wife, Patricia. Elder Holland was born on December 3rd, 1940, to Frank D. and Alice Bentley Holland, who we spoke quite a bit about. And in 1963, he married Patricia Terry. They are the parents of Matthew, who we talked about, Mary Alice and David, who we spoke about, the parents-in-law of Paige, Lee, and Jeanne, and the grandparents of 13 beautiful grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. So again, a long bio for somebody who has dedicated his life to greatness. And it was cool to hear him talk about kind of where that came from, where that motivation and drive came from a young age. And Josh, what are your initial thoughts? Having just gotten off that conversation.
Just to add some context for those who may not know anything about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Mormons as we've historically been known, our religion has between 16, 17 million members, which is small. You look at Islam, Catholicism, Hinduism, each of those have 1 billion each or something. So we're a very small religion compared to a lot of the major world religions, but there are about 16 million Jews in the entire world. So on that might give you a sense of the importance of Elder Holland being one of the top 15 people who are leaders in the church. He's got an incredible responsibility to watch over these 16, 17 million members of the church. And so for us, this is a big deal doing this interview, not just because of the numbers, but because of what Corey and I believe as members of this church also about his role as an apostle of Jesus Christ. And so, but the great thing about the interview is that here we are, we're talking to somebody who almost seems untouchable in a way, right? It's like for Corey and me, it's like we're talking to Peter out of the Bible, or James or John out of the Bible or something. And yet he's this normal guy. And I'm sure if we could interview Peter, James, and John as they were back in their day, we'd say, these are just normal fisherman type guys.
Yeah.
And that's what really comes across is, on the one hand, he's a normal guy. On the other hand, you do recognize he has special experience and a special calling, and there's some specialness around him as well.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I mean, in our planning and preparation for this discussion, it was very intentional to not approach the conversation as members of this church. It was, we wanted to be interviewers who were looking at this and asking questions to his life and leadership and responsibilities and roles, and how he's found hope through some really big opportunities and some big trials and tribulations that he's faced. And that was the way we approached it. But again, there's just no helping the fact that having that in common with him, it kind of weaves in and out of our relationship with that same religion. But the intent for anybody listening was to hear a different perspective from a religious leader. And I hope really, truly, that we'll be able to interview religious leaders from all faiths, because it's fascinating conversation to hear why they're doing what they're doing and why they believe what they believe. And given the state of the world, he talks specifically about where he finds hope and why he finds that hope, and what he believes is the goal of all of this. He talked specifically about how he is a Christian who believes that Jesus Christ, the same Jesus Christ that lived in the meridian of time, as he put it, will come back to earth at some point. And again, objectively looking at that, or philosophically looking at that, just as a theological belief, it's fascinating to pick somebody's brain who, again, has dedicated his entire life to that cause, right? And man, it was a fascinating kind of window, like you put it, into that world and into what he believes. So really, really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm confident that anybody who listens is going to be able to take some real nuggets of information and wisdom from somebody who's got a lot of life experience and a lot of wisdom, for sure.
Yeah, I hope that people will be uplifted by it, that they'll feel something, that they'll have a spiritual experience. But if for no other reason than that this is one of the top leaders of a major world religion that's known around the world, you'll at least find this interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we won't talk anymore. We'll let everybody get into the episode and learn more about Jeffrey R. Holland. Please enjoy this episode and this conversation with Elder Jeffrey R. Holland. Okay, so Elder Holland, before we jump into that, we're going to refer to you this entire conversation as Elder Holland.
Okay.
Can you explain the significance of the title Elder to anybody that may not understand that?
That's actually quite a common question from those who aren't members of my church. They don't think I look elderly enough, but though these days I really do look elderly. I'm feeble, but I carried this title when I was pretty young, and it is a title just taken from the scriptures. When the Savior occasionally met with the elders of the church or of the community. Sometimes it was in the Jewish world, it was a civic title, but it's a title that most of the adult men in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints carry. And we have a lay priesthood, and it's associated with that. In my case, and I think it's probably what's behind your question, maybe it's a capital E on elder because of the office that I hold. We're called elders in the governing bodies of the church too. The principal governing bodies. That's I guess what we are, but we carry that title from basically 18 or 19 or 20 years of age up to the completion of our life. And again, adding my own particular role as an officer in the church, then we're still elder. I'm an ordained apostle in our church, but we generally do not use that title. I'm Elder Holland. So okay. Maybe that's enough introduction.
That is great. And if you've ever seen anybody out there that's seen those LDS missionaries with the white shirt and the tie and the name tag, they're elders. Time they're elders as well. Yeah. So
and when they're 18 and somebody says you're an elder,
yeah, it doesn't make as much sense.
But it's just a common title that we've used in our church.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for the clarification. So back to that story. So when I was newly married, we had just had our first child. This was in 2013 or so, and I was a student at Brigham Young University, Hawaii. And I was just coming back from one of my first business trips, actually with Josh. And I was at a crossroads in life. I was trying to figure out what my next step was going to be. I was feeling pretty anxious, and I had some big decisions to make. How do I provide for this young family of mine? What am I going to do? I had no idea what I was going to do after I graduated from school, and it was coming up quick. And I was sitting at the Salt Lake airport waiting for my flight to Honolulu, Hawaii, with a layover in Seattle. And as I was sitting there, I see a familiar face, somebody that I had seen for quite a few times on the TV, not face to face, walk by, and that was you, Elder Holland. And you came by, and you went on the plane, and you sat down, and I immediately said to myself, "Hey, I gotta say hi to him when I see him. I gotta stop and say hi. I'm not gonna walk right by and act like I don't see him." So as I'm getting on the plane and boarding, you were sitting in the aisle, and I didn't care who was behind me, to be honest. I was being a little selfish at the moment because there was a line of people trying to get on the plane. But I stopped and I looked down and I said, "Elder Holland, I wouldn't want to pass by without at least saying hi and shaking your hand." And you responded really nicely and said, "Oh, it's great to meet you. Where are you headed?" And I quickly told you, well, I'm a student at BYU Hawaii. I've got a wife and a kid out there, and I'm heading back. And you explained that I think you were going to a conference of some sort in Seattle. And then you stopped and you looked me right in the eyes and you said, "You're doing a great job."
Well,
and I remember in that moment feeling like, hey, that's a nice letter, or I guess not letter, but a nice confirmation in this moment. Somebody outside of everything going on in my own head, it gave me a little bit of hope. And
good.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. And this being the Hope Strategy podcast, we talk all about some of the trials and tribulations that people that we're facing in life, so whether it's, again, as entrepreneurs, as parents, as just everyday people trying to get things done, and how we can find hope in some of those times. And that moment for me was one of those little glimmers of hope that said, "Hey, this is going to be all right. You're doing a good job. Keep your head up. Keep on trucking." So I appreciate that.
I'm glad. I'm big on hope, so I'm glad if that came across to you.
Yeah, and we'll talk a lot about that. So can you tell us, Elder Holland, what your childhood was like? I know you grew up in southern Utah. I went to Pineview High School in St. George. I don't think that was there when you were at Dixie.
You are kidding.
No,
that's amazing.
Yeah,
there are only two of us in the whole world, and here we are on this podcast.
So tell us about your childhood. What was it like growing up? What were some of those defining moments for you as a kid there growing up in southern Utah?
Well, I had an idyllic childhood. I have to say, I was born in 1940. I missed by the time I was old enough to know anything, World War II was over. It kind of became the Cold War era, but it was after World War II and before Vietnam, and it was the Eisenhower years. And if you ever watch Happy Days on TV, I'm Richie Cunningham. I had a wonderful childhood. Small town, 5,000 people. Now booming, I don't know, 125,000 if you count the circle down there of towns that have blended. So it's really a boom area. But in my day, I think I knew everybody in town, and I think they knew me. You couldn't possibly get in trouble. If you did something wrong, it was home to your mother well before you got home. Even though that was only 30 minutes later, everybody knew everything about everybody. And it was a great childhood. Sports were big for me. I lived for athletics, one season to the other. When you finished baseball, you started football, and when you finished football, you started basketball. We just had a great time growing up, and beautiful country. That's idyllic. As I talk about an idyllic childhood, it was an idyllic setting with what's Canyon Country now, and a tourist stop for lots of people around the world. We had a small school, Dixie Junior College then, kind of community college, and people were interested in education, and my parents were, and they made sure I studied, and I suppose that helped shape my professional career as I went on in education. We had a strong religious life, and in Utah, the church community was largely one faith for all intents and purposes. And so a lot was built around the church and church activities, even a temple, one of the rare temples then, one of the few temples. So I have to say, for those years, the late 50s, I graduated from high school in 59. That'll help you put it in context. It was locally and nationally, maybe even internationally, it was a great time to be a kid, to be growing up, to be a teenager, and ask all those questions, Corey, that you were asking about. What am I going to be when I get big? But it was a good place to do it. Had good people influencing me.
Who were some of those mentors that you remember growing up there? And I just went back to St. George for the first time in 8 or 9 years, and I couldn't even believe how much it's grown since then. That was one thing that caught me off guard. And then the other thing that caught me off guard was how beautiful it was. I just forgot how every direction you look, it was just stunning scenery. I love it down there. Who were some of those mentors that you had growing up as a kid?
I guess we all look back at in those years, we'd all have that in common. That you look back and probably think of your school teachers, some pivotal school teachers. I had very, very attentive and good elementary school, grade school teachers, and we were close enough. Again, the city was small enough. We could all walk to school. We could ride our bicycles to school from all over the community, and so that kind of gives you an idea of the size then. And I agree with you with the growth now, how much if you measure the traffic alone, you can tell how much it's grown. But coaches had a strong influence on me. We had a very legendary junior high coach named Reed Blake, and he's probably started shaping my would-be athletic career. We had a high school coach named Walt Brooks, who coached all sports. We only, today there's a coach for football and a different one for basketball, and everybody has assistants. And, there's a legion of coaches almost for every sport. Poor Walt, he had to coach all sports, and he washed the towels and cleaned the uniforms. I mean, he mowed the grass on the playing field. He did everything. I look back with regret that we didn't somehow help him. I didn't realize what high school sports would grow into now with you're knee deep in coaches and assistants. But it was fun that way. You got to know the coach well, and you certainly got to know your fellow players well. Went on to attend that little junior college. Had some very, very wonderful teachers there. A historian named Juanita Brooks who wrote very important history of Southern Utah, including the church's influence in Southern Utah. Had an English teacher named Robert Dalton, who was just as good a teacher as I ever had. And I went on to Yale for my PhD, and I don't know that any professors at Yale were any better than Juanita and Bob Thomas and Marion Bentley, and he was my speech teacher. Or everybody's speech teacher, and very popular in the musical performances that he'd put on for the community. Anyway, those are some of the names, and I didn't budge. I too served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and except for that 2-year period away, all of my early formative educational experience was in St. George, from kindergarten through sophomore in college. So that a lot of shaping went on there, and then I went on to Brigham Young University for my bachelor. So great teachers, probably some in the church as well. We had a strong church influence in that community, as I've said, and so much of our social activity was built around church associations. My wife had the greatest influence on me. We're high school sweethearts. That's why I say it's sort of a Richie Cunningham story. We met in high school and dated there and on into college, and then she waited for me on my mission. I came back and she immediately left for New York to study music. We had the strangest courtship you've ever heard. It was, I don't know, a 5 or 6 year courtship, 2/3 of it by letter and phone call and postcard.
Yeah, you weren't pulling up FaceTime and talking face to face every day.
No FaceTime. Zoom in those days. Just an expensive long distance call on the telephone. That old-fashioned telephone that nobody uses anymore. Actually, have a wire to it. Anyway, just imagine a sort of a perfect growing up environment in a small town. We certainly weren't very sophisticated. It wasn't New York or San Francisco, but a surprising amount of culture and art and theater activity, and as well as rough and tumble teenage years. So good people, and again, a great environment. I too go back and realize how beautiful it is. How one of my habits is to slip out into the countryside. My brother has a pickup truck, and I might borrow it and just drive out into those pink hills and blue hills and lavender hills that surround St. George, and make it so striking. So it's hard for me to distance myself. I don't get back much, but I think about it a lot.
Yeah.
So how does a boy from a small town in southern Utah end up getting a PhD at Yale?
You have a mother who said, "You're going to study before you do anything else, boy. So you go in there and do your homework." That's, I suppose, the seeds for my education were really, really planted in my youth with parents who put a high priority on education for my brother and my sister and me, and their stories are not educated stories. My mother went to Dixie College, so she had 2 years of community college, as it were. We'd probably call it that now. But my dad was sort of taken out of school by a stepfather in the 7th grade. He had only a self-made education, became a popular, lovable. He was 100% Irish and acted like it. Was fun and jovial and hail fellow, well met. But he educated himself with a couple of correspondence courses and became an accountant. We'd say a bookkeeper. And I didn't know we didn't have very much money. I didn't realize that till I was gone, that he didn't make a lot of money, but we had a great life. But my point is, neither of them had a lot of education, but the very fact that they had encouraged us from our youth, from our childhood, from our elementary years to study, that was our way up in life, was to have a good education. Neither of them necessarily thought in terms of a PhD, but I just sort of had it in my bones that I loved education, and then decided, really as a result of my mission, I decided that I wanted to teach. So if I was going to teach, I needed the tools, and I guess that's when I knew, go for broke, pick a good school and do the best you can. So we sort of shot for the stars, and that's how I ended up at Yale. I had a special experience about that. I won't bother your audience with it, but it was for me a spiritual experience where I knew very early in the middle of my BYU years, I knew that I would go to Yale, and I knew I would study American Studies in that program. And it was easily 5 years before that actually happened. I mean, I had the moment, I had the impression 5 years before I actually drove into New Haven. But all those years I knew that's where I was going to go, and I hadn't applied, and I hadn't been accepted, and I hadn't gotten a scholarship, and all the things that I needed, I didn't have then, but I knew I was going to go. So I want to think that the hand of heaven was in a little bit in my choice. You're a Bostonian, Josh, and I don't want to offend you, but I turned down a scholarship to Harvard to go to Yale. That's especially with my son, who now teaches at Harvard. We don't talk about that a lot at the dinner table. We think don't want to pull out a Harvard Yale fight right here at the Holland living room. So anyway, that's that. a long story for a short question about.
There are worse places you could go than Yale.
There are. I loved every minute of it. Really did.
You brought up this interesting point, though, that you knew you were going to Yale. And I think even a lot of people who wouldn't call themselves religious or spiritually minded can relate to this, that they make decisions because they feel like it's the right thing to do. As you look back in your life, how many of the important decisions that you made, now that you look back, can you see that you had a feeling or you knew that it was the right thing to do ahead of time, or that you were guided somehow?
Well, I think the really important ones, almost all of them, was a feeling more than anything I sorted out logically or rationally. I guess I wouldn't want to think they were irrational, but I don't know that I was counting on my head nearly as much as my heart. And if I had 2 cents of advice to people out in your audience, that's part of the advice I'd give is trust your heart. Follow your dreams. Go with deep-seated feelings. Now, I think we have to be in the right. I think we have to be kind of living right and in the right circumstance to have those feelings. You can't just go off on tangents. We all know people who've kind of done what seem crazy things, and they haven't.
Some people have crazy dreams.
Yeah, crazy dreams. But and maybe you have to bounce. Though we all have advisors. We all have people we bounce things off of. And I and you and a lot in your audience are prayerful people. I would put all that in the formula. But I just believe in what your heart tells you. And my heart told me that. And as you say, people in the audience who aren't particularly religious would have the feeling, this is what I ought to do. That's how we got married. We didn't have any money. I mean, if you thought through rationally about our getting married, we'd still never be married. 58 years later, for example, if you thought about money, we still don't have any money. If we'd waited for that, we'd still be waiting. And kids could say, oh gosh, I've got all this school ahead of me, and we want to have children, and I can't afford it, and I don't see the way, and on and on and on. Just forget that. Go with your heart and get married. And James Thurber, as long as we're on this subject, James Thurber gave the best definition of love that I've ever heard. He said, love's what you go through together. So, why wait till we're out of school and got a car and got a job and got a condominium? Boy, that wouldn't have worked for the Hollands. So part of my love for Pat has been that she's gone through all of this with me. We've done all that together, and it was because we trusted our heart that it would work out, and it has. A lot of it miraculously, I say, at least miracles with a lowercase m. But when we needed money, somehow it turned up, and when tuition was due, if our scholarships didn't cover it, somehow a little money arrived. So follow your heart, guys. Trust your feelings.
You've mentioned, that's great advice, and you've mentioned a couple of times this process of what I'm going to call faith, right? You jumping into wanting to go to Yale, getting married early, and not having the money, not having the place to live, all of that in my mind is calling upon some sort of faith, right?
Sure, of course.
There's also hope, and we actually asked Josh asked some people on Facebook. He just said, hey, hypothetically, if you had the chance to talk with an apostle of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what might you ask? And there was actually quite a few people that asked what the difference between faith and hope is. Well,
that's an interesting question, because scripturally there seems to be a difference. We have a wonderful, wonderful extended passage in our Book of Mormon which talks about faith, hope, and charity, the three great Christian imperatives. And Paul introduces those in the New Testament, and there's this continuation or examination of those in the Scriptures. So there does seem to be an actual theological difference between faith and hope. But sometimes I think the way you've described it, Corey, in our everyday life, those two get pretty close together. They if you hope it, you sort of have faith to pursue it, and I see that as the kind of relationship that's involved here. I think without let me back up. The strict definition of hope is hope in the resurrection, technically, at least as it's outlined in the Book of Mormon, that if we have enough faith in Christ, if we have enough faith in the future, then we are entitled to have the hope of a glorious resurrection, of a continuation of our life and a renewal of our life on the other side of the veil. I think if you were to press me for a theological difference, that'd be the difference, is that we sort of attach hope to the resurrection. At least that text does. But for you and for me and our families and our friends, hope and faith kind of blend together, and either one, both of them, are, I think, elements that keep us going. They keep us getting up in the morning. They keep us with a smile on our face and seeing the brightness of the future. We're not overcome by circumstances. We don't get overly worried about a COVID crisis. We're attentive and we're mindful of the challenge, but we don't see it as the end of the world, and we don't see it as something that's going to mar our life forever. There's, call it hope or call it faith. You're seeing beyond that there's a brighter day. The sun's going to come up, and I'm one who believes the sun comes up every morning. Now that actually isn't good astronomy, but it's good conversation, that we wait and hope for the brightness, the hope, the possibilities of a new day. We get renewed every day and every year, and we have happy endings. For me, this is the church of the happy endings, and I believe in hope, and I believe in the things in the scriptures that are written about hope, and I'm very mindful that a lot of people struggle and ask about it. I'm not surprised that your question might have elicited something about hope, because it's a miserable time. Political chaos in this country and really around the world, pandemics, earthquakes, hurricanes. We had trouble in North Carolina with a hurricane. We no sooner do that than we wake up and Iowa's got one, and there are fires in California. That's enough to discourage anybody, but it doesn't discourage me, because as I say, I'm a hopeful guy. Or if you will, I'm filled with faith. I believe in promises and possibility and the future and the gifts of heaven and the goodwill of good people. So I'm not surprised at your question. And anybody I could talk to, I would say, be hopeful and be happy and smile. And in a scriptural passage that's probably the most common used in the Bible and sacred writ is, it came to pass. And some things just come in order to pass, and they do, and we get better and healthier and happier. And some of that, when it doesn't work out, I'm not Pollyannish. I know that some people have cancer, and some people lose a spouse, and some children lose a mother, and there's nothing very happy about that. But I still believe on the promises on the other side of the veil. I do have hope in a glorious resurrection, and I believe those children will have a mother, and that wife will have her husband again. So I'm not Pollyannish, but I'm a happy, hopeful man, and find myself talking about that a lot. My talks tend to drift that direction. I hope they do, in giving people, there's the word, I hope we can give hope to each other.
I'll tell you, Elder Holland, Josh and I have talked a lot over these past few weeks in preparation for this, and I'm going through some of the thoughts and questions that we've asked, and you're checking some boxes, so we appreciate it.
But you put a nickel in me, and I go on for 35 minutes. You're not going to get a soundbite from me, guys. I don't know I've never saw a soundbite that I could stand. I have to give you a whole chapter. So you're gonna have to do some editing on this.
Hey, I think Josh and I would love to sit here and listen to you talk. Well, I've got all the nickels I need right now to.
Yeah, well, you'll need them.
So I'm we're gonna come back to some of these more theological questions, because I think, given the state of the world, I mean, literally, you just outlined it pretty much how I had written things out with the chaos and the confusion. We really want to come back to that idea of hope, and specifically your faith, the LDS faith. How that provides you and the people around you, and with hope, and what you kind of see as things to come, that gives you that hope.
Sure.
Before we jump into that, I want to ask one more question, just to continue to kind of paint this picture of you and who you were growing up, and how you got to where you are today. I'm gonna we talked about one of your sons who's a professor at Harvard, right? I'm gonna bring up one of your other sons, Matt, who when I was a student at UVU for a few years, I talked to him a few times in the hall. He was the president there at Utah Valley University while I was there. He's quoted as saying that his, quote, fondest memories from childhood are at the dinner table. Every night was a kind of family home evening filled with laughter, compliments, encouragement, interesting conversation, testimony, teaching, and expressions of love. You always knew Dad was happiest when he was at home with his family. What a great quote. I hope that one of my four kids will say something.
I'm proud of him for saying that, but my kids and my wife made me happy. That's why I was happy at home. But that's a wonderful quote. I agree.
So between your bachelor's degree at BYU, and then you got 2 master's degrees, and then you went on to get a PhD. Is that correct?
Right.
And then you moved on into your professional career. To have your son have that recollection. Again, Josh and I both have small children, and I was just talking to my wife last night. We're having our 4th in a few weeks, and we're saying, how do we keep our head above water here? Sure. For him to have that type of memory and recollection, I'm sure there was difficult times and everything, but what is your advice on prioritization in life, in making sure that when you're home, you're present, or that you have your priorities in check? And how do you have a process for managing that?
Well, yeah, I don't know that I have a process or a formula, and we all have to be a little flexible. Life has its demands, and particularly if you're taking on what you guys are doing, you've got a profession going, and you've got your own family. We all go through that, but I think a rule that I tried to have, I don't think I was very good at it. Matt's wonderful compliment is probably reveals more about him than about me, but somebody I greatly admired, an earlier leader in our church, and you two will know him, President Gordon B. Hinckley, said to me once that he left his work and his troubles at the front door. He said he didn't need to bring all of that home. Too much baggage, too much of the woes of how the day had gone. So he just kind of theoretically or ritualistically or in his own head, just when he got to the front door, he just dumped it there on the welcome mat, and thought he would not take those troubles into a wife and children who probably had challenges of their own. Wouldn't have been the same degree, but if his kids were in elementary school and didn't have a good day at recess, that's sort of the equivalent of his grown-up problems. So I never forgot that. I don't know that I lived by that as well as I should have, but I've never forgotten it. And it's pretty good advice for any young husband to remember that he owes it to his wife and to his children to be upbeat, to be hopeful, to be happy, and not come home and be an Eeyore in our family. When anybody's too grumpy or too whiny, we pull out an Eeyore label from Winnie the Pooh, who's always finding something wrong, who's always whining about something. And so I don't know. We've just sort of we've never been quite the whiny kind here. We just have wanted to be happy. And if Matt says it was that at the dinner table or otherwise, then I'm glad. We were a happy family. We enjoyed car trips. I never cared. I can't really think we went on very many great vacations, any great destinations. I always thought we were probably too poor. But what I remember on any of our family vacations, in quotation marks, was the trip getting there, the car trip, including somebody saying, he's touching me, he's touching me, yeah, or the bathroom stops, or whatever. That's what I remember was the fun of getting there. Again, family time. So you asked about priorities. First in my life is my faith, because anything I can give to anybody else, I think, is dependent on what I believe about God and what I believe about Christ, and what I believe about saving principles. I don't have anything to give if I don't have that. So first in my life is my faith, and inseparably connected with that is my family. We have a doctrine in the church that families are forever if you're faithful in your religious life. And so those really are inseparable for me. But I would list family, I would list faith, and then family, and then doing the best you can. And that can be any number of ways. That isn't a hierarchy of professions. It doesn't mean that somebody who's a medical doctor is higher or better off than a plumber or an electrician. That is just not so. I know miserable doctors, and I know happy plumbers. So it's not a hierarchy that way. It's just do something you enjoy, do something that you like, as if you can. Not everybody has that privilege, but if you can, be in something you enjoy doing and do it as well as you can. And the natural consequence of that devotion to your profession will certainly care for your family. It'll be more than adequate in your income, whatever it is. It'll be okay, because you'll bubble to the top. You'll kind of like the field of dreams. If you build it, they'll come. If you do that plumbing right, they'll hire you. And so those three things of very quickly. There'd be other ancillary issues that I'd add if we went on down the list. But if you just wanted three, I'd say faith, family, and your own personal. I'm reluctant to say profession. It's your own personal development. It's your own personal commitment to the community you're in, to the brotherhood and sisterhood of life. If you could just kind of do your best with those three, I think everything else comes along. Now those are three big ones. I mean, those are three that could consume you. But so be it. Good things to be consumed by. That's worth being consumed by. I think priorities and principles that are that lofty. I'd try to shape my life around those three.
A lot of people might look at your family, Elder Holland, the things that we've been saying about you and your career and your children and the great things they've accomplished, and especially members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who are familiar with you and know you. It's easy to look in from the outside and say, well, he's had a charmed life, everything's been easy for him, and we don't know the details. Is there anything that you're comfortable with sharing with us about some of the trials of your life or your family that might give the rest of us hope to say, oh, he's kind of a normal person and I'm a normal person, and maybe there's hope for me too?
Sure. Well, that's a great question, Josh. I've had a blessed life. I think there's no question, and I'd be guilty if I didn't say that I hadn't been blessed. I have been blessed, but I can't say that it's been charmed. My father again was a magnificent father. I don't want to put any shadow on that. But he was not active in our faith, my faith. He on occasion would drink and always smoked, and occasionally there was a little sense of are we going different directions? You know, is his life different than mine or even my mother's? That wasn't a serious matter, but we probably had a little more tension in our home than other Latter-day Saint sort of picture perfect homes. I don't know that there is a picture perfect home, but we certainly did not have an ideal home in that sense of everybody on the same page with religious belief and a religious commitment and even religious habits. So I worried about divorce. I wondered whether my parents were going to stay together. I think they probably wondered whether they were going to stay together. They were absolutely wonderful, and I think even as I say that, I look back and if I had it all to do over again, I'd choose those parents. So I loved them dearly, but it was not a charmed life or a charmed home. I've already said that we didn't have much money. I didn't realize that till I left home. But one year, my parents, their entire income to give a Christmas present, this will make me a little tender, was a pedigree sheet of our family, just a genealogical pedigree sheet. That was the entire Christmas gift that year, because that's all they had. When we went to school, when Pat and I went off to school, if we hadn't received, I'm talking about the Yale, BYU too. I was fortunate enough to get scholarships up the line. I got all the way through school on scholarships, but I wouldn't have been able to go to BYU without both of us working. We both worked, and I had a scholarship, and Pat was good enough to work and go to school on the side. For me, it was sort of the opposite. I was trying to go to school and work on the side, but between the two of us, we made it there, and then the same jaunt to Yale, and I through a little, I think a miracle, got a special scholarship there. In my department, they had one scholarship for the whole graduate school component in my department that had a stipend for a wife and a child, or wife and children, and I got it. And I don't know that we could have made it without that stipend. But then on the other hand, I was about the only one married with children. I really looked like Brigham Young back there with a wife and kids. But I'm just thinking of those blessings that came, and they were blessings. And so if that sense you want to say charmed, fine. But we know what it's like to scrape and claw and pray and hope we had enough money to pay our tithing and get through school. And sometimes that was every month. And it didn't stop when we finished school. Our early professional life, you think you can go buy a sofa, and then you look at the price tag and say, wow, is that what sofas cost? So we knew that for a long time. So boy, you got me meandering here with a down memory lane. But the long and the short of it is, through it all, we knew it was going to be okay. We knew we were going to make it. And I think in that sense, you can't say there was much that was charmed about it. It was just hope. And a lot of it, just, I can't overstate this. A lot of it, maybe most of it, maybe all of it had its roots in our religious faith. It wasn't just hope for hope's sake. It wasn't just be, whistle while you work. It was, for us, it was theological. For us, it was religious. It was because we'd been taught that. I'd read that. I'd read it in scriptures. I'd heard it in church. I came to the point that I was teaching it in church. So a blessed life, yes. A hopeful and happy life, yes. But charmed and unique, boy, I don't think so. It'd be fun to sit down with almost anybody and we could compare notes about truly challenging times and emotionally difficult times and downright frightening. I think it's fair to say frightening times about, is this all going to work? But through it, faith triumphs. The substance of things not seen is what Paul says. So we believed in the substance of things not seen and waited till they were seen. And thank heavens, literally, thank heaven, they came to be seen.
Thank you for sharing those details. There's a lot more we could cover about your background, but let's jump ahead to your responsibilities in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You've served in many capacities within the church, and now you have this calling of being an apostle, which to those outside of our faith who aren't familiar with it, we literally regard Elder Holland as an apostle, just like the apostles in the time of Christ, like Peter, James, or John. How does that happen, or what more meaning can you give to that than my explanation for those who are listening to this who might not be familiar with our faith?
Well, you've given a good simple answer, and I should give you simpler answers than going on and on. But I think we do. We believe in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The Latter-day Saint Church is, to give a shorthand title. We believe that the Church of Jesus Christ in the meridian of time, the church he established, we believe that it was lost. We believe that the death of the apostles, certainly beginning with the death of the Savior, and then the death of the apostles, that by 200 or 300 years into the era, those keys and those offices were lost, and of course we don't read about them. We don't hear anymore. We don't get new apostles, and we have churches and then break off churches. So we don't believe we're either in the Catholic tradition from Rome, and we don't believe we're in the Protestant tradition, breaking away from Rome. So rather than Protestant or Catholic, we tend to describe ourselves, and we believe rightfully so. The heart of our message is that we're a restored church. We're not a protesting church. We're restored. If there was something, and if you go back to the Martin Luther era or the Calvinistic era or any of that Reformation period, we don't believe that you could, if something had been lost from the Catholic Church, we don't believe that you can simply reform that and make it alive again. You can't get those keys. You can't get those offices unless somebody gives them back to you. And that's what we believe. We believe that they were given back to a young prophet, and that prophetic tradition, that apostolic tradition, continues to this day. But it's from the original source in heaven, not from a lateral source drawn from some other church that might have lost it. So therefore, how can it give it? And there are 12 of us, just as there were in the New Testament, and we with 3 members of the First Presidency who also have apostolic authority. We provide the governing bodies of the church, the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 Apostles, and we meet regularly. In fact, we'll meet tomorrow. We meet every Thursday traditionally, and cover the world in a rapidly growing church that is growing just dramatically, and much of it, not necessarily most of it, but increasingly most of it internationally. So we have great mix of languages and cultures and traditions and frontiers that probably Peter, James, and John didn't immediately have to worry about in the Holy Land, in Palestine and Rome and Turkey and neighborhood. But we're at work in a global church, and it taxes the best that we have. It keeps us as prayerful and as hardworking as we know how to be. All of us, by the way, temporarily kind of confined because of the COVID crisis, but as soon as that's over, we'll be back on airplanes and covering the globe. So that's the history that links us with the New Testament, and with that strong emphasis on restoration rather than a Catholic tradition, whether that's Rome or Greek or any other form of Catholicism, or a protesting branch, a Protestant group. And out of that, we thought, somebody thought, heaven thought, that those apostles need to be restored to the earth, those keys, those offices, which we had lost and which were not referred to ever again. They had to come back for Christ's church to be on the earth. And we believe firmly out of the scriptures that Christ will return, that as he himself said that he would come, we believe that he will come. We have no idea when. We're told that not even the angels of heaven know that. That's a very well kept secret with the gods, the Father and the Son. But we do believe he'll return, and that's why the latter day part of our title, Church of Jesus Christ. Yes, that's the restored apostleship and restored keys and restored ordinances. But Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints just means we're in that later era, post New Testament, post primitive church, when we believe Christ will come again. And whether it's near or far, our work is largely to prepare people, prepare communities, prepare nations, if we can, for the return of the Son of God. That's scriptural prophecy and promise, and we take it seriously and try to live for it.
There's a lot to unpack there, and a lot of different conversations that could be had.
A lot of doctrine there.
Yeah, lots of it. So I guess we want to give you the opportunity. I mean, you've spoken a lot, and you give a lot of talks in the role that you play, right, in the church. You speak to people literally all over the entire globe.
That's most of what I do.
And you've given some pretty amazing talks, and a lot of those, I actually listened to a talk you gave when you were the president at BYU in the 80s, and you brought up early, I mean, even back then, the topic of depression and anxiety and the big things that a lot of the students at the time were facing, trying to help them, face discouragement and things. Why do you speak on that so much? What is it about that topic, about the difficulties, the discouragements, the downsides to this, life? What is it that's drawn you to that subject?
I think the reason I talk about it is, I don't know that I was surprised. Surprised is probably the wrong word, but I was concerned as a president of the university, and since looking over the world, meeting people everywhere, members of our church and those who aren't. I think I was concerned that I did not realize there was so much, whether you want to call it depression or just emotional issues, emotional anxiety, and that can be everything from having a bad day to clinical. I mean, the kind of thing that puts you in the hospital. I think I was and am concerned that it is so widespread. And the challenge that I thought personally was, people are afraid to talk about it, that somehow it sounds weak, or it sounds wrong, or there's a flaw in me, or I'm inadequate. You could have people who were clinically depressed or bipolar or something that was really, really causing trouble in their ability to live life or even just get up in the morning. And yet nobody could talk about it. It was like the ugly stepsister. You just, somehow brush such an issue into the side and try to fake it, pull on a smile or act like there's nothing wrong. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it as a church leader and as in the earlier case, an educator, I wanted to take the lid off of that and say, come on, we talk about appendicitis, we talk about diphtheria, we talk about cholera. If I go to Africa, as I do regularly, I have to get malaria shots. Nobody is embarrassed about that. Nobody says that I've got to be, to pretend and pull a fake face over a legitimate illness. I said, let's get serious and treat this for what it is. Treat it as an illness. And again, here I do make the distinction between just being late to have your term paper in. That's not the kind of discouragement or depression I'm talking about. But when people have a genuine medical circumstance, then I thought at least my little homely, unprofessional, unmedical, non-MD contribution could be say, there is nothing wrong with this. There is nothing to be ashamed about. It is not an embarrassment to the family that somebody's, bipolar. Let's talk about it. And boy, as I've been willing to talk about it and have wanted to talk about hope and happiness and light at the end of the tunnel, I can't tell you the amount of correspondence I get for people saying, I wondered whether I would ever live long enough to have anybody in authority or anybody at a significant level in the church or in the community, even to just be open about this and say it's okay and there's nothing wrong and it is like appendicitis in its own way. So I could take you to my file and show you my knee-deep correspondence of people who just said, thank you, basically just thank you for not making me feel like I'm an embarrassment to my family or that I'm an embarrassment to myself, that I'm weak and have a flaw and I'm marred for life. Well, they're not marred for life. There are things we can do about that. And there's hope. There's always hope and happiness. But you can't get at it if you can't talk about it. You can't get at it unless there's a way to just be candid and open. And then we put our arms around each other and pray together. And sometimes when necessary, we go see a doctor together. I think that's probably the history.
I think I know personally, and from the lives of people around me, and having heard some of these talks that you've given on that subject, I've felt that same sentiment from many people. Just we're talking about it, and it's something that there is a light.
Well, I hope you have, and I hope we can talk about it more. Surely we have to have come a long way from the old days when you put people in a dungeon. If they had a mental or an emotional or that kind of difficulty. We just need to be more open and more genuine, more Christian, and more educated than that.
Well, Elder Holland, I can speak for both Josh and I. We love you. We appreciate who you are and all that you mean to us and so many people all over. And for the time you've taken with us today, I think we want to give you one last opportunity before we officially wrap to share any last thoughts. I mean, you've covered everything from your upbringing to the restoration of the church to a belief that Jesus Christ will come again in your faith. We just wanted to give you one more opportunity to share any thoughts on that. Maybe as we would refer to it, bear a testimony. And we felt like that would be a good place to wrap it up. That's
sweet of you, Corey and Josh. I've loved this. You just look great. I mean it. Now we've joked a little. But you look like I want young entrepreneurs and young bright Latter-day Saints to look. You look good in the eye, and you're awfully handsome, and your wives knew what they were doing when they married you. Now just make sure you treat them right.
Thank you.
But I've loved this, and I thank you for giving me the chance to to talk about the things that matter most to me, the things I live for. We've talked here about hope sort of being for other people. Well, I'm talking about hope for me. You've talked, you've led me into reminders of why I am happy, why I am hopeful, and I think I'm not blind to life's problems. Certainly in this calling, I have every reason to know the challenges of people's lives. But so I'm not unmindful. I'm not blind to difficulties. It's just that I think I can see beyond them. I think I can see past them, and that's a religious experience for me. That's a religious gift for me to again, Paul's wonderful line about the evidence of things not seen. How can you have evidence of things not seen? Well, it's through the Spirit. The substance of things hoped for. How can you have substance to something that's just hoped? Well, you can, and you two represent that. I've just thought that here looking at you. You look like the best and the brightest, and it's reminded me. You've reminded me of what I believe and why I believe it. We have covered some of it. We haven't covered all of it, but I live for the reality and to perpetuate the reality of that restoration, that fact that God lives, that the heavens are open. He is not an absentee landlord that went off somewhere and is lost in the universe doing something else. That's an old deist position. And he's not an angry, vicious, venomous, malicious God trying to throw down a lightning shaft or trip you or let the air out of the tires in your car or have you fail in your podcast. He is for us. He's not against us. There is a religious tradition that he's like the third base umpire, just anxious to call us out, just in hopes we'll miss the slide, and get tagged. Maybe nobody understands baseball anymore. I should have used a different analogy, but maybe
you're talking to the right guy with the baseball analogy.
Soccer, he's anxious to throw a red card at us. That is not the God that lives. He's our Father, and he loves us, and he wants to do everything humanly possible, in this case, superhumanly possible, to bless us and to help us. He's really there to hear our prayers and to guide us and direct us and to make our lives the best that they can be. That's the God I live in, and that's the God that restored this experience to a very young prophet who was a clean vessel and a worthy recipient to start this thing over, or at least get it restored again. And all of my blessings that have somehow come because I believe that. All the blessings of my life, if you talk about charm or gifts that come to the Hollands, I have to say they've all come because I believe that. Starting with my New Testament love and loyalty to the Savior that walked those streets, to the Savior that'll walk the earth again. Those are the brackets of my belief and my hope and my happiness. And I had a missionary once say, Elder Holland, you sound like you'd give your life for the church. And I said, Elder, I am giving my life for the church. That's what I'm doing right now. I just haven't died yet, but I'm what life I've got, I'm giving it to those great purposes. And I do feel that way about it. He was right. And he'd heard me talk and understood that I cared that much about it. I was that passionate about it. And I would, and I did, and I do give my life for those common beliefs. And I'm grateful to you two for sharing them, for representing the remarkable goodness of your very own image, the countenance that's on your face and in your eyes and comes across on that computer screen. So bless you and bless your audience, and be believing and have hope, because everything I've said is true as I live for it and will die for it and believe it forever. It's all true, and it's the way of happiness. And I leave that little blessing on your audience, an apostolic blessing, which they may never have had before. But I do that lovingly in the name of Jesus Christ, the chief apostle, as he was called in the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews. In his apostolic power, I leave that love with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
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 Thank you, Elder Holland. We owe you big time. We love you. We appreciate you. And this has been an absolute pleasure, something we'll always remember.
I'll remember it because you look so good and I love you. Take care.
Hello, it's Corey here, and I just want to thank you so much for listening into the Hope Strategy podcast. I hope you're enjoying it as much as we are enjoying having these amazing conversations with these incredible individuals talking about hope. We'd love it if you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, and leaving us a review on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, and share it with anybody you feel that can benefit from these messages of hope. Thank you so much for listening to the Hope Strategy podcast.